The blind contestant started speaking. Simon Cowell raised his hand. "Wait," he said. "Just wait." And no one knew what would happen next. The America's Got Talent stage was lit up in its usual spectacular fashion. Red backdrop glowing. Golden buzzer positioned prominently at each judge's station. Thousands of lights creating that signature AGT atmosphere that promised dreams could come true. A man walked onto the stage. Mid-50s. Simple clothing, jeans and a button-down shirt. Dark sunglasses. A white cane tapping gently against the stage floor with each careful step. He moved slowly, deliberately, counting his steps the way blind people do when navigating unfamiliar spaces. Host Terry Crews greeted him warmly. "Welcome to America's Got Talent. What's your name?" "My name is Robert Mitchell," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm from Portland, Oregon. And Robert, what will you be doing for us today?" "I'm going to sing," Robert said simply. The judges looked interested but not particularly moved yet. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his usual position, black shirt, arms crossed, that familiar expression of polite skepticism. Howie Mandel leaned back in his chair. Heidi Klum smiled encouragingly. Sofia Vergara watched with curiosity. "Tell us a little about yourself," Terry prompted. "Have you been singing long?" Robert shifted his weight, his hand gripping the white cane a bit tighter. "I've been singing since I was a child. My mother taught me. She said I had a gift." He paused, and something in that pause made the entire theater go still. "But I haven't sung in public for 23 years. Simon's eyebrows raised slightly. 23 years? Why not?" Robert turned his head toward where Simon's voice had come from, his dark sunglasses reflecting the stage lights. "Because 23 years ago, I could see. And then I couldn't. And when you lose your sight, you lose more than just your vision. You lose a lot of things." The judges exchanged glances. The audience leaned forward in their seats. "I was a music teacher," Robert continued, his voice beginning to crack slightly. "I taught at a high school in Portland. Choir, piano, music theory. I loved it. And I had a daughter who was 10 years old. Her name was Emily. She sang in my choir class even though she was only in 5th grade. I let her join the high school choir because she was that good." He stopped, composing himself. Simon's arms had uncrossed. He was sitting up straighter now, fully focused on the man on stage. "We were driving home from a choir competition," Robert said. "November 2001. It was raining. I was tired. And I didn't see the truck run the red light. The theater was completely silent now. Even the cameramen seemed to be holding their breath. Emily died instantly." Robert's voice broke. "And I woke up in the hospital 3 days later and couldn't see anything. Traumatic brain injury. The doctors said the blindness was permanent." Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. Robert was still standing center stage, his hand trembling on his white cane, clearly trying to maintain composure. He took a shaky breath to continue. That's when Simon raised his hand. "Wait," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Robert, just wait a moment." Robert stopped, confused. "I'm sorry, should I not?" No, Simon interrupted, standing up from the judge's table. "I just need a minute. Everyone just hold on." The control room erupted into chaos. "What's Simon doing?" the director hissed into his headset. "Is he stopping the audition? Do we cut? What's happening?" Producer Sam Donnelly stood behind the director, staring at the monitors. "Keep rolling," he said quietly. "Just keep rolling." On stage, Simon had walked away from the judge's table. He stood with his back to the cameras for a moment, one hand on his hip, the other covering his mouth. The audience watched in stunned silence. Howie, Heidi, and Sophia looked at each other, equally confused. Finally, Simon turned back around. He walked toward the stage, not back to his seat, but toward Robert. He stopped at the edge of the stage, just a few feet from where the blind man stood. "Robert," Simon said, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it on this show. "Before you sing, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." Robert nodded, turning his face towards Simon's voice. "Why are you here?" Simon asked. "What made you decide to come to this audition after 23 years of not singing in public?" Robert's lips trembled. He gripped his cane with both hands now, like it was the only thing keeping him standing. "Because I made a promise to my daughter. The night before the accident, we were in the car driving home from a different competition. Emily was so excited, we'd won first place. And she said to me, 'Dad, one day you should audition for one of those talent shows. You're good enough.'" His voice cracked completely. Tears were visible running down his cheeks from beneath his dark sunglasses. "I told her that was silly. That those shows were for young people with big dreams. But she insisted. She made me promise that if I ever got the courage I would do it. She said, 'Promise me, Dad? Promise me you'll show people how beautiful your voice is.'" Robert wiped at his face with one hand, nearly losing his balance. Simon took a step closer, ready to steady him if needed. "I promised her," Robert whispered. "And the next day she was gone. And I spent 23 years thinking I'd broken that promise. That I couldn't keep it because I couldn't see, couldn't drive myself to an audition, couldn't function in the world the way I used to. I used my blindness as an excuse to hide. To give up. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead." The audience was crying now. Not scattered tears but collective sobbing. Howie Mandel had his head in his hands. Heidi was wiping her eyes. Sophia was openly weeping. Simon stood at the edge of the stage, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes glistening. "What changed?" he asked quietly. Robert smiled sadly. "I met someone. A woman in my support group for the visually impaired. She'd been blind since birth. And she told me something that broke through all my excuses. She said, 'Being blind doesn't mean you stop living. It means you live differently. And your daughter didn't make you promise to audition because she wanted you to see the stage. She made you promise because she wanted the world to hear what you could do.'" He straightened up, taking a deep breath. "So here I am. 23 years late. But I'm keeping my promise." Simon stared at Robert for a long moment. Then he did something he'd never done in 15 seasons of judging talent shows. He climbed onto the stage. The audience gasped. The other judges sat up straight, shocked. Terry Crews stepped back, giving Simon space. Simon walked across the stage and stood directly in front of Robert. "Robert, I'm standing right in front of you now. Can you feel that?" Robert nodded. "I can hear you. I can feel you're close. I want you to know something before you sing," Simon said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been doing this job for a very long time. I've heard thousands of auditions. I've pressed the golden buzzer for incredible talents. But I've never, not once, had someone stand on this stage who showed more courage just by walking out here than most people show in their entire performances." Robert's breath caught. "Your daughter was right," Simon continued. "You should have auditioned years ago. But you're here now. And that promise you made to her? You've already kept it. Because the bravest thing you've done isn't what you're about to sing. It's that you're standing here at all." Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. In the control room, Sam Donnelly was frantically gesturing at his assistant. "Get Simon back to the judges' table. We're running over time. We need to move this along." But Simon wasn't moving. He was still standing on stage with Robert, and he was reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small object, his personal microphone pack remote. He clicked it off. "What is he doing?" the director hissed. "His mic is off. We can't hear him." On stage, Simon was speaking quietly to Robert, close enough that only the blind man could hear. The cameras caught the moment, but not the words. Simon's lips moved. Robert listened, his head tilted slightly. Then Robert nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. Simon clicked his microphone back on and stepped back. "Okay," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear now. "Robert, whenever you're ready." Robert nodded. He handed his white cane to Terry Crews, who took it carefully. Then Robert turned to face where he knew the audience sat, even though he couldn't see them. The music started. A simple piano accompaniment. The song was "You Raise Me Up," a classic, one that had been performed on talent shows dozens of times. Usually, Simon hated when contestants chose overused songs. But not tonight. Robert opened his mouth and sang. His voice was pure. Not technically perfect. There were small imperfections, moments where emotion overtook precision. But it was honest. Raw. The voice of a man singing not for victory but for closure. For a promise made to a daughter who would never hear it. The audience was silent except for quiet sobbing. Heidi had her hands pressed against her mouth. Howie was crying openly. Sophia was gripping the judges' table, tears streaming down her face. And Simon stood on the stage, arms crossed again, but this time not in judgment. He was listening with his eyes closed, his own tears visible on his cheeks. When Robert reached the chorus, "You raise me up, so I can stand on mountains," his voice cracked completely. He stopped singing. Just stood there, trembling, overcome. But what happened next, no one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget. Simon walked back across the stage to Robert. He placed his hand gently on Robert's shoulder. "It's okay," Simon said quietly. "Take your time." Robert shook his head. "I can't. I'm sorry. I thought I could do this, but I can't." "Yes, you can," Simon interrupted. "Because she's listening. Emily is listening. And she doesn't care if you hit every note perfectly. She cares that you kept your promise." Robert's legs almost gave out. Simon steadied him, keeping his hand on the man's shoulder. "Finish the song," Simon said. "Not for us. Not for the cameras. For her." Robert took a shaking breath. And he sang. Through tears, through pain, through 23 years of grief finally released. He sang the final chorus. When the last note faded, the audience erupted. Standing ovation. Screaming. Crying. 3,000 people on their feet honoring not just a performance, but a moment of profound human courage. Simon guided Robert to face the judges' table, then walked back to his seat. He sat down, wiped his eyes, and looked at his fellow judges. "I think we all know what this deserves," Simon said quietly. He didn't wait for the other judges to respond. His hand moved to the golden buzzer and slammed down hard. Golden confetti exploded across the stage, raining down on Robert, who stood with his hands covering his face, sobbing. Terry Crews rushed to embrace him. The audience was screaming, crying, celebrating. Simon stood at the judges' table, his hands still on the buzzer, tears streaming down his face. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. After the show, Simon had Robert's white cane professionally mounted and placed in the AGT studio. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "In memory of Emily Mitchell, some promises take 23 years to keep." But there's more to the story that cameras didn't catch. What Simon whispered to Robert on that stage, when he turned off his microphone and spoke privately, was this. "My father died before I could tell him I understood why he pushed me so hard. I know what it means to carry words you never got to say. Sing for her. She'll hear you." That moment changed Simon. The judge who built his reputation on harsh critiques and impossible standards had revealed something deeper. Crew members noticed it immediately. In auditions that followed, when contestants struggled or broke down, Simon no longer just critiqued. He listened. He waited. He gave people space to be human. Robert's audition aired 3 weeks later and became the most watched AGT clip in the show's history. Over 200 million views. But the numbers didn't matter to Simon. What mattered was the letter he received 2 months after the taping. It was from Robert's support group, 17 blind musicians who had watched Robert's audition and decided to perform again. They'd formed a choir. They called it Emily's Promise. Simon framed that letter and hung it next to the mounted white cane. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. Robert released an album 6 months later. The proceeds went to a foundation for blind musicians. And every time Simon presses the golden buzzer now, he thinks about the blind man who taught him that courage isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up when everything inside you says to stay hidden. Some promises take 23 years to keep. But they're always worth keeping.